Rainey's.
Amazing Guido Rainey's.
Absolutely
Well, these are
wonderful.
some of the greatest collectors in Europe in the 17th century, but from the time of Philip II, really. I said this royal family has a lot to do with something as basic as collecting a lot of paintings is a thing to do. Before Philip II, people are collecting a lot of other items. And so this family has, the Habsburgs are very important in that story. But I want to welcome you and introduce you.
Yeah, of course.
And we have Robin Lane Fox with us today. He is in the Prado for our conversations, also to give a lecture tomorrow on images and ideas of nature and antiquity in the early Christian period. We're going to spend a little time today talking about an issue that I think is especially interesting as we walk towards a gallery where we're going to focus on some ancient paintings. But one thing that I find surprising if one doesn't focus on it is the fact that almost everything that you see in these ancient galleries of paintings in these great museums is an idea of antiquity inherited from them, or even more likely, more so, it is a vision of antiquity as seen through the eyes of 17th century, 16th century creators. And I think we all realize terms such as Renaissance, we all know that there was a lot of influence of antiquity. But what we don't know is that as you walk in here and look through these frames, almost everything you see is an idea of antiquity. You could even call this and all the other great European museums, museums of images of the ancient world.
I'm so glad you say that. You have to understand, it's my world. I have been taught Latin since the age of 7, and I learned Greek at the age of 10, and I was reading Homer at the age of 13. So it's the world I inhabit. It's not a surprise to me at all.
Since then, let me add that you've been studying and teaching at Oxford. You're now Emeritus Professor. You're very well known for a number of books. I have read books on Alexander, on early Christian history and so on. One of the most renowned classicists and experts on antiquity that we have in our times. Let me come into a room where
I think, Alejandro, the important thing is, I live it. It's to you, I have to explain what to me still comes naturally. You might say I've been brainwashed. How lucky I was.
Let's walk through these rooms. We are working hard like we do every morning.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Museums seem like these very permanent places where things are always static. And every morning, every major museum is hard at work, moving things around, painting, lighting.
We think of you as being perfect.
Exactly, and permanent and static.
Oh, so look at this.
Here we have two images of Poussin that I was especially interested in showing you. Look. So here's a question that comes to my mind.
Right.
Their idea of antiquity, what we learn from them, how far is it from the real thing, and to what extent are we learning something close to reality? I think they know about antiquity mainly through art and literature. They have very little historical context. They don't know much history. What can you tell us about this?
Well, it's what we now study as the reception of classical history. I urge that on every visitor to a picture gallery. As you say, you're looking at the way they received what they knew of classical antiquity. And what's so fascinating is how much more we now know. Some small examples. They knew almost nothing, I think really nothing, of Greece. Can you imagine the root of it all? They were just looking at, you know, to me, as a Philhellene, a lover of Greek art, they're looking at derivative Roman works. And I think the most important thing in my lifetime, we have found in northern Greece, in Macedon, amazing surviving paintings by the great masters in the royal tombs in Macedon and in other tombs there.
And these were found way later than this period,
well, they were found, you know, some of them were found in 1977 onwards. They're the great events of my lifetime. And I urge people to see them because it raises a big question. If the great painters, starting with the Florentines, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and then if all the people in your museum and all the Spanish artists, if they'd seen the real Greek masters, how different would their ideas of antiquity be? They're working in a similar spirit, but the distribution of figures, the four colors that the classical painters use, their brilliant conveying of movement and emotion just by line. There'd be so many differences. One must realize what you have said. The Renaissance, the marvelous works in the Prado of the 17th century are based on a very slender idea of antiquity. They love the stories, they love the texts, but what do they know of my lifelong wonder, classical art? They haven't seen the paintings. They've hardly seen the paintings on pottery, the great geniuses of the 6th and 5th century BC in Greece. These only turned up in tombs in Italy, really from the 1740s and 50s onwards.
That's about 100 years after this was painted, for
long
example.
After, so they knew nothing. And think what they didn't see, the wonderful paintings on a white background, the sketching of the grieving women done by Greek masters. They had no idea. And again, they had texts, but amazingly, we keep having more texts because we have the papyri that come from Egypt. They had none of this.
They haven't seen any of that.
But they had plenty. I mean, I'm not taking it away from them. They had enough to produce masterpieces. But it's a narrow
based
idea.
on an illusion.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting to me that they work very hard at what they do. This is not something, just the spirit of a moment, and I'm just going to make things look ancient without working hard at it. There are generations of proto-archaeologists that are very carefully writing to each other, creating ideas of how Roman sandals were, for example, from the Trojan column. Look at this Poussin.
Well,
he really is concerned with these, with the cloth, the folds, the outfit, with making this look ancient, but he has a wrong idea of what antiquity is.
Well, I'll give you one very good example. People don't always know. This marvelous horse. Look, I love horses. I'm very excited by it. I'm not so convinced by its neck, but it is, as we say, prancing. It's on its hind legs. Xenophon, the Greek writer, says the most impressive presentation of a horse is when it's on its back legs. And in art, believe you me, until Delacroix, in the picture of the massacre of Chios in the 1820s, anyone shown on a horse on its hind legs is a dominant leader and the dominant figure with a good connotation in the picture. And here we go off on the boar hunt. The white horse, white, very significant, as Poussin would know, the colour for the horses in Roman triumphs. They knew all this from texts. And Atalanta behind on her white horse.
Meleager, the prince, dressed in a more fancy outfit than anyone else.
Indeed. And these are the dominant figures, all of them on horses on their hind legs in these two cases, because they are the heroes. That's an example of what Poussin knew. But the whole conception of the painting, if there's an idea in his mind, it would be closer, I think, to an ancient sarcophagus. We must always remember this, that they have these surviving in Rome particularly, sculpted panels on the sides of ancient burial sarcophagi. And they are very, very important to them in two ways. Sometimes they look at them personally. I mean, obviously you mentioned their fascination with antiquity, and the great artist there is, of course, Raphael, who is made the keeper of antiquities, as it might be, for the Pope.
The lead archaeologist in Rome. In
the leading archaeologist. Is so exciting. It's all coming out of the ground. I mean, thrilling. I just say it still is, and it's equally exciting. And so they look very closely at ancient sculpted reliefs. But I must emphasize that the sarcophagi they see, again, are all Roman period. They're 600 years after the supreme masters. That's one source. So that's the first thing. But secondly, of course, like me, to my great gratitude, they have been taught Greek and Latin in some cases, and the princes for whom they make the paintings have learned the wonders of particularly Latin literature. They have tutors who are very learned. I would have been tutor to one of the kings in Spain, and I would explain to the painters, we would like a picture of this piece of poetry. So they read particularly the Roman poet Ovid. And in the era of the 17th century that we see here and later, Ovid is the king. All the stories of people changing shape, being pursued by the gods, going hunting, like here, they are based on the text that they read of Ovid. And they read so closely, you know, every detail has a match.
And they're reading translations already. Ovid has been translated into every European language.
All over the
16th
world.
century in Spain,
Yes.
It's already translated.
Well, to me, I have to say, I find it extraordinarily boring. It's very fashionable.
You told me
now.
this, yeah.
It goes on and on and on, and after about 100 lines, I've had enough. But I was of a generation where we were taught to turn English or French into verses like Ovid, so we knew how to do it.
I have to tell you that I sometimes reading Ovid do feel really moved. We have a beautiful picture here of with the heifer Io painted by Rubens. Too far now to go see it.
Oh.
And the pain in the face of that heifer, which is painted like a little girl, comes from the reading of a poetic text in a way that can be really moving. Let me ask you something about this horse again. Aside from specifics, I think it's fair to say that painters like Poussin, but all artists at this time, are also chasing a Roman ideal, which is the idea of idealism. The concept or the idea that everything can be better than things around us. So when Poussin is painting this horse, he's not only trying to be naturalistic, he's not only trying to make a horse-looking image, he's trying to make it look beautiful, his idea of beauty. I say the perfect rounded shape. The idea that forms tend towards an abstraction. And that abstraction should make us aware of something better than what we see around us. So that idea is very much inherited by these people.
And it's inherited by it's begun by the patrons of classical art. They want to be shown as they wish to be shown, an idealized version. Look, we don't really know what Alexander the Great looked like.
Anybody that's been portrayed in a work of art that's dead, we don't know what they look like.
Alexander is the first Hollywood film star. He controls his image. He won't let people just put any old picture of him in the newspapers. He has an image of himself that he projects across the world. It's one everybody knows. I'm very glad what you say about the horses, because I am a lover of horses. And the artists I most revere are those who show the brilliance of a horse, and they really know it from inside.
Velázquez is incredible at that. Velázquez's portraits of the king on horse.
He's in my top 6. But the tops really are an Italian artist, Pesolino, Géricault, the French artist, absolutely brilliant, Delacroix, wonderful, wonderful, and the king, the English artist, Stubbs.
And before all of them, Leonardo.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry, he's number 5.
He's number 1, I would say. But
okay, I know you like the idealization, but always, and then, we have to mention the dogs. The dogs become a big thing, because I think they've all probably seen Veronese. Would you think that's right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Veronese loves these dogs. Now, to me, that is not a very plausible hound. I live with hounds all the time. He's a bit strong. This one is absolutely brilliant. And the movement and everything, that's a wonderful interpretation of the lines in Ovid. But they're very big now on the dogs, which I think, above all, since Veronese, have become a major feature in these pictures. Look at these chaps here. So my advice to people coming and loving the Prado is look for the dogs.
Look for animals. It's any window into these paintings, look for horses, dogs, a certain color, a certain figure. It's good to remind our public that learning how to paint is a very difficult thing. These people spend usually about 8 to 10 years with a master, then they go through guild examinations. Very, very demanding. And I say this because, again, one can look down a bit upon their idea of antiquity as being not the real thing. And let me show you, there's another picture by Poussin over here.
I'm sorry, I must emphasize, the more we know, and the more we will know, long after you and me, about antiquity, the more narrow or individual their view will seem. but it is the most stunning view. It's wonderful. It underlies some of the greatest pictures ever painted, including Antiquity.
There also, this comes to mind right now, one idea inherited from the ancients is reverence for beauty. So that's no little thing. One of the things they're trying to do is look lifelike, tell a story, but always with the idea of creating a beautiful thing which will move me.
Well, you said two crucial things. You mentioned the element of what I would call pathos. You described it in the picture of Io, and this is so strong in Ovid's stories. There is sentiment, feeling. There is the pathos, the moment when suddenly somebody turns into a tree or they die prematurely. This is very, very strong in Ovid's poetry. And you find it particularly in connection with women, which would be, again, a great cue for sensitive artists. If you think of the New Testament, obviously the wonderful Christian scenes that underlie everything else, there are individual women healed by Jesus. There are no female apostles. We have to have the Virgin Mary, who is slightly predictable. She's either mourning or learning she's pregnant. But for scenes of pathos, you do well to go to Antiquity. And then that pathos, in turn, moves us. And this is very true to the ancients, because if you read the supreme masterpiece, the whole of the Prado could vanish. And as long as we have Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, I will not be completely wretched. Pathos is the Iliad's underlying theme. And that is something they find so strongly in the 17th century, in classical literature, which they couldn't find so easily in the Gospels.
I was thinking when you mentioned Homer that we're surrounded by God's heroes and adventurers. That's Zeus, Achilles, and Odysseus. That's Homer for us. We spoke about this painting earlier, you and I.
Right.
I always have a sense this is where I want to retire.
Right. Okay.
But this to them is an ancient idea of nature, which has been tamed and to my eye lives in harmony with human beings.
Yes.
What comes to your mind? I should add that you're a gardener, you write about gardening, that's one of your expertises. And you're speaking at the Prado tomorrow about images of nature and ideas of nature. What comes to your mind when you see this?
I think three things. The inspiration for this is plainly antique. And help me, we have probably philosophers.
We don't know. Some people say Diogenes, we simply don't know who they are.
Okay. Classical figures, again, a horse, notice, on its back legs. But you would not find a landscape painting, even now, in classical Greek art, the beginning of it all, in the 5th, 4th century BC, that looked like this. They would know the ancients' love of landscape, particularly from texts, and particularly those written by Pliny, the learned Pliny the Elder, who went to see the eruption of Vesuvius and died there. But they elaborate much more than the ancients would. And they also, in this picture, we get less of a sense that we have in classical wall paintings of the presence of shrines, gods, heroes, what people sometimes call, wrongly I will explain in my lecture, a sacred landscape. We know this from the wall paintings from Antiquity, which we have found at Pompeii and Herculaneum, but again, so importantly, there's no way that they could see those. They weren't found until the 1750s. I mean, Poussin would have been delighted with it all. But instead, he's opened his eyes and composed, as always, so cleverly, the forward positioning of the tree, all the various lines you can draw from the gestures, the points, the distribution of the figures. It's his own imagined landscape, starting from the classical world, but we will never find, I think, a classical image that looks like this. But I so agree with you, Wouldn't it be wonderful to be sitting here having, in my case, a croissant and a cup of espresso, looking together out over that picture?
You know, it's fascinating to me also the role that this painting has played in my life, which in a way this is a lesson about good taste.
Yeah.
And taste matters as much as it does, but it's not insignificant. And my idea of good taste comes from many things, but in part this picture, literally this picture.
I'm so pleased.
The tones, the range that goes from blue to grays, and how those turn into green and a little bit of blue. It's an idea of beauty that he came up with when he was thinking about another idea of beauty that he knew not much about in the end. So it's interesting how these things can remain relevant to us.
Indeed, what they would most know through texts is pastoral, shepherds with flocks, and particularly here Virgil, easier for them than the Greek Theocritus, shepherds artificially singing of their loves, throwing stones at their sheep, and then regretting that they're having to leave their fields. That is a type of landscape, the pastoral landscape, that is so important, it becomes very important in the 18th century. But this landscape for landscape's sake, in a way, this is something that Poussin has taken an idea and just taken it much further.
Yeah, you could also explain this in a different way, like every painting. Art history is a lot of layers. You can think of this in terms of the economy of art. Landscape painting has become a new genre, a market that has great demand, and people are thinking of new products and so on. But they're thinking, what they're visualizing and giving us is an idea of antiquity. I want to show you some things over here as we come close to the end of our meeting. We're going to walk through what we call the Upper Goya Rotunda, La Rotonda Alta de Goya, where you have an image of Charles V looking like he's naked, he's destroyed the enemy. In this case, the enemy is specifically identified as a Muslim, the Muslim world, a crusading emperor and so on. And he's Polyclitus reborn. This is Pompeo Leoni, mid-16th century, spectacular image. Again, this is an image of antiquity completely.
Well, it's inconceivable without the classical antiquity. The figures are either Heracles or, above all, my personal hero forever, Alexander the Great, the spear-holding Alexander, done by the great artist Lysippus, the only one who was allowed to sculpt Alexander, the supreme maestro. And the nudity, this is so important. In Christian art, you will not find naked figures, but nudity becomes acceptable through the classical world, both the nudity of women and the nakedness of conquering figures. And the Romans had picked this up. To have a hero, you would even have one of the Roman emperors, heaven help us, Augustus, the least military of men, would be shown naked with a spear triumphing over this, that, and the other. That is the image of prowess, manliness, achievement, and it's not in any way erotic. And it's exactly that tradition that is being played on here. Without classical art, we wouldn't be standing here.
Also, he's standing on a stub of a classical column. This is a more recent thing, of course. But again, we all know that about the term Renaissance and about the influence of antiquity in European art and thought and culture, but it's all pervading.
Oh, yeah, it's not just one moment.
And I don't think anybody that will line up and come into this museum within 20 minutes we're about to open, I don't think any of them are aware of the fact that they're entering a museum of ideas about antiquity. They wouldn't call it that, but that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my advice to anybody is to revel in the interplay between the ancient world and what you see here in the Prado, and then please go home and learn Latin. It's not difficult. It really isn't difficult. Within 2 years, you could have read Virgil. Well, what an achievement. And my God, beyond you then stretches Greek, and you could go and do two things. You can read my recent book, Homero and his Iliad, and then you will read the Iliad, and then I have said very firmly, you have not lived for nothing.
Come on over here to finish, just to show you, it gets noisy also in these big galleries, but we're going into a smaller room where we find two real treasures painted by Titian, early 16th century. He is illustrating for Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara. He's illustrating Philostratus images written in Greek in Roman times. On the right, the painting is based on a single image from book 1 from the images, a chapter called Cupids.
Right.
And this is a combination of two. But what Titian is doing is copying, quote unquote, a painting that doesn't exist from a written description.
Right.
This is what I'm talking about.
Well, this is a theme with a very long history. So important. We don't have the original sometimes. We have a detailed account in written texts that survive for us of either possible paintings or ones that existed. Everybody knows probably Botticelli's Birth of Venus. What they don't realize, it's quite difficult to find out, is it's modeled on the fact there had been a previous Birth of Venus done by the great Apelles. And Venus is, of course, modeled on the mistress of the man, one of the Medici who patronized it. Now, there are two great sources. There is Pliny the Elder, we have referred to, who describes many lost paintings, and there is the amazing work, still not studied enough, of literary descriptions of paintings by Philostratus in the 3rd century, early 3rd century AD. And very early on, people took the challenge of trying to show in painting themes that the ancient descriptions had given them in a text. This actually happens even in Antiquity. But it had started in Florence, certainly Botticelli, very important, as not only the Birth of Venus, but the scene of calumny, modeled on descriptions of Apelles. And then it flowers in these amazing paintings, trying to show us the picture that the ancients had in mind, known through a text. But look at what it allows him. It allows him these amazing, and I mean amazing, women. You wouldn't find these easily in other sources. And without the ancient precedent, would you really have risked painting this wonderful lady, naked and so impressive with her hand back over her head?
She's been drinking too much, probably. Here's a little cup.
Yes.
Just they're all celebrating wine, the gift of Dionysius.
This would be an unthinkable choice of scene without the classical precedent for the Bacchus and the women and Dionysus and the description of it in a text. It's through Antiquity that the nude gets into Western art, and not just, as we saw, the conquering male nude with the spear, but these amazing women. Well, our eyes are drawn to them, but not only to the naked women. Look at them all. Marvelous pictures, the movement of it all.
Incredible picture.
Now, it's a wonderful thing, but it's in dialogue, carefully, with the written word. And that, to my mind, makes it 10 times more amazing to try to illustrate even one of my columns in the Financial Times with a photograph. This is too much for people to do every week, but to show exactly the wording of the column in a painted picture, well, even the Financial Times can't pay David Hockney to do that every week, but it would be quite a thing. So Robin, I really admire it.
Thank you. I want to thank you, say goodbye. We're going to end our conversation. It's been so interesting to listen to you, and again, the idea is to convey to our viewers that not only is the Renaissance one of many things that happened in Europe at the time, but it is the pervading one in the world of the arts, from the 15th through the end of the 18th century at least. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Well, I have to say the pleasure is mine. What an amazing collection, and even just talking to you about a few of them, at every turn I see more. But beyond them, the greatest wonder of all, Antiquity.